This is Designing Security Products, where we talk about the intersection of cybersecurity, research, and product design. Today, I'm talking with Michael Kellar, who is the founding head of product at Evoke Security. So, hey, Michael, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, William. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I know we've talked a little bit before just about this intersection of security and research and design and product and all of this stuff, and so it's fun to get to nerd out a little bit together on here instead of just in a Google Meet sometime. Maybe somebody else will say a little something that somebody else can get some value out of. You never know. Could happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think it's interesting, especially now as the AI of it all is really changing the meta of what does it mean to be a product person? What does it mean to be a designer? And it's a fun time to chat.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Well, hey, let's start. Tell me a little bit about what your role is at Evoke.
Yeah, so Evoke Security, we're give or take 8 person, maybe 10 person startup. Essentially, we're focused on cybersecurity. So think EDR for agents. So really focused on what is happening with AI, where are your agents potentially creating risks. We give customers visibility on every agent in your environment. We alert on risky behavior, and then we block basically critical threats at runtime. So what do you do when an AI goes rogue? And so it's a new problem. It's evolving. And so, what I get to focus on then is the, really early stages. I get to go across the board from customer success to product to design, to occasionally front end engineering with all the pitfalls of that. It's super fun, and it's a really fun role to be in.
Yeah. So I'm sure at an 8 person team, that's probably a different experience. You've got more hats that you're wearing, I'm guessing, than if you're at a larger organization. And I know that you've had some different roles in different companies before this. So how has this been different maybe than what you've done in the past?
Yeah, so just before this and where we met, I was at a company called Blumira. That was a 75 person cybersecurity startup. And so that's a very different role, being VP of product at a company where you have kind of a team and you have a structure and revenue and all those good things. And now we're really early stage and figuring out what does it mean to look like. And so that is a multiple hats. It is a broader role of, solve the problem of the day versus, that longer term, what are we going to be doing 2 years from now? Consistent conversation that I would always have. Even very different from before that, I was at Travelers, and you have thousands of people and you're figuring out kind of how do you work across parts of the organization. So it's interesting to get to see how that flows across different companies.
Gotcha. It's interesting that you said the solving the problem of the day. So how do you balance? I know when you're very early in an organization, you're still trying to figure out product market fit, right? And so on the one hand, you can have this 2 year vision of where you want to go, right? But that's real blurry and fuzzy and everything. But then it's also you're tempted by all of these things that you're learning with talking with potential customers, and you're kind of figuring out where is this product market fit. So how are you able to kind of how do you balance that and kind of figure out where to go on the pendulum between those two extremes?
Yeah, I mean, we're early, but we're lucky to have really good early customers. And so that enables me to spend a lot of my time really partnering with them. And I think that's where my first focus remains. And so I think, you mentioned it, right? It's balancing multiple roles and then also balancing the stage of company with kind of our opinion with the reality of what the market is telling us. And so I think that's where I spend probably most of like the majority of my time, just barely partnering with customers, talking to customers, understanding how they're using our product, understanding what they want out of Evoke, and how do we be a better, AI security partner for them. So I think that having kind of that guiding light, and that's especially, I think you come in as a product person at a company this early, and this is pretty early to have a product person. And so part of my intent with that was not just to have multiple roles, but also to be really, really customer oriented and to provide additional focus and time, especially for the CEO, the CTO, the co-founders. And so that was a big focus for me. I think beyond that, kind of depends on the week. So this week I'm a front end engineer. Last week I was designer. Next week I'll be a product person again, or product manager again, I should say. It really, it depends, especially when we're this early.
Yeah. So maybe let's back up a little bit and tell me about how you got into the security world itself. Most of the people that are in this product role, this design role that I end up having conversations with, they didn't start out in security, right? They come from another industry. And so they're taking the principles they know from these other industries, but then bringing them into security. So how did you get into security?
Yeah, so I started my career at a company called Bottom Line Technologies. I mean, this is a decade plus ago, so it's been a while. It was a mid-sized public company, fintech, essentially focused on payments in a lot of different forms and fashions. And so I was in essentially our banking unit. So I was an analyst. I was doing some consulting on M&A and just kind of figuring out what does it mean to be a mid-sized public company who's growing and been around for 30 plus years. As I was doing that, we essentially acqui-hired a couple of people doing data science and having this concept of a data science platform. And that kind of weirdly led me into touching cybersecurity for the first time. So
Mm,
let's say 3 years or so into my career, I was working on the primary thing was basically like, how do you predict fraud inside of payments?
mm,
Maybe not surprising, you're in a payments company, and this is a good amount of time ago. So like we would try and build our own system for that, our own solution for that. It was pretty a big enough company to have data where we could do interesting things.
mm,
So that was my first introduction. But that I would say then I didn't really get into cybersecurity until a few years later when I was at Corvus Insurance. So we were, or we, they are a cyber insurer now acquired by Travelers. As I mentioned, that's where I was. And so I got to see us go from essentially, a 200 person startup getting acquired. And that kind of gave me a taste for both cybersecurity and how does cybersecurity get applied. So essentially I focused on risk mitigation. And so that was my area. Everything from how do you understand the risk profile of an organization to then how do we keep policyholders secure. So that's how I got into cybersecurity. Long story short.
okay. Very cool. Very cool. So if you could go back with what you know now
Mhm.
and talk to that person that was just getting ready to dive into the this transition to security, what is one piece of advice that you would give your former self back then?
I think when I look back and what would I tell myself a long time ago, I would say probably the main thing is a little bit less even cybersecurity focused and
Mm,
more startup focused in the sense of, the earlier you go, the faster you learn. And so I think that my career, I started at a relatively big company and, I got smaller and then I got bigger again and now I've gotten smaller again, as we noted earlier. And
mhm.
I think that it's paid dividends for me. I've been able
Okay.
to learn a lot faster. It's helped me to pivot into different industries. I started out in fintechs. I've worked in marketing technology for a few years and now obviously am very focused on cybersecurity. And I
Mhm.
think having that breadth of experience and especially having it early, having those multiple roles, it's really helped me to learn really fast and then be able to take on more and more as I've grown in my career.
Okay. So kind of a theme of adaptability, right? Kind of like whatever's coming on, like all of the things you're learning in all of the different arenas can help inform what you're doing today.
Yeah, I think helping people, understanding customers, being a good listener, some of those skills, like they just continue to build on each other, and it's been really helpful to spend so much time with customers now, especially.
Yeah, we were talking about that before, and I think you
Mhm.
said something along the lines of that you're spending more time talking to customers than ever before. So
Yeah.
unpack that for me a little bit. Like what does that mean? What does that look like on a weekly basis or a
Uh,
monthly basis?
Yeah, I mean, so my last role, I would get brought into customer calls, especially in the sales cycle, or if anything was going wrong, certainly I'd want to have a conversation, or if I'm doing certain types of discovery. But here, because we don't have customer success team yet, so I take on a lot of that role, which is really exciting and it's really fun. But it also means that like I am talking to customers every single day, probably multiple hours a day. That gives me the opportunity to iterate on designs, get live feedback on where our product is doing well, where it has some opportunities to grow. But it's both the product hat and the customer success hat, and so that gives me both a reason and a need to be talking to customers a little bit more frequently than I would otherwise. But I think most product people would tend to say, if you're not talking to customers every single week, you're really not doing your job anyway. So it's kind of a bonus, especially, joining the company a couple months ago. The fact that I've been spending time every single day talking to customers, I've definitely learned a lot faster that way.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so I hear different things from different people when they come into this role, especially when you have someone like you mentioned. It is a very small organization to have a product person that's kind of on the end this early. So was that something that was a priority to the founders of this company?
Yeah, so the founders, I actually worked with the CEO and a couple of people on the team back at
Okay.
Corvus. So I knew them before. And it was, when we had the conversation about this role, it it was definitely really important to me. And I think it was important to them as well that I was
Okay.
able to stretch. I think, maybe I've stretched further than I thought I would. The first week I was shipping PRs, which is not something I'd done in a long, long time.
Right.
And as I said, this week, my main focus has actually been working on the front end,
Okay.
which I will say thrilling as a product person to be able to ship code across the board. And that's a benefit, a testament to the system we built and all those things. It's not necessarily possible for, PMs all over the place to be shipping a lot of code or even a good idea. But I think it's, especially at this stage, really important to say, hey, my job is what the company needs me to do. And that's true of anybody, but yeah, it was definitely an early conversation about like, hey, this is what we need right now. We need someone to make sure our customers are happy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned shipping code. I'm not sure exactly how much experience you had in that in the past as of one of the hats being a developer, and how much of that is because of the new AI tools
Mm-hmm.
that bring that skill set closer, right? Where it's
Yeah.
easier for you to be able to leverage those. Maybe tell me a little bit about how that has changed your process.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't shipped a PR or anything close to it in probably about a decade, maybe a little bit
Okay.
more. So, my background is not as an engineer. My background is in either data science or as a product person for the vast majority. And so this was really a shift for me. And when I was doing data science, it was kind of like consultancy, analytics and reporting and kind of having a conversation around it. And so this is the first time where I've really had part of my role focused on that. And I don't know if it'll last, but it's a good time while it does. It really is about AI.
Okay.
I think my process starts in understanding the customer's problem. That hasn't changed. What are we trying to accomplish? What are they trying to accomplish? What are they trying to do? They're in our product for a reason, and understanding that. And so then being able to see like, hey, we're getting drop off at this point, or this button doesn't quite make sense to this person, or this workflow from our dashboard to a detection to understanding the session, there's just not interconnectivity. I'm able to see that, and then I'm able to fix that. And I
Okay.
certainly wouldn't classify myself as a designer. My old joke used to be I would just make all the buttons orange because that sounds like a good idea to me. I've never actually managed to make a product's buttons orange, but one of these days I'm going to figure it out. But it's really it's awesome being able to like actually see that and then be able to act on that with limitations. Yeah.
As someone who is from the University of Tennessee, the state of Tennessee, I love the idea of making buttons orange. Yeah, no,
All right, at
but
the University of Tennessee, I bet you could do that. That would make sense.
right, it
You've
would
got the
make
right
sense to
color
make the
scheme.
buttons orange. Yeah, yeah. Maybe you just need to find the right opportunity for you to make the buttons orange.
You're right. I just have to I have to pick companies I go to in the future based off of, is it orange? Can I make the button orange? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, I remember having a conversation with my daughter when she graduated high school and where she was going to go to college. And a topic that was much more important than I had anticipated was if the school had cute colors. That was really a thing that happened, and I was like, I had not considered that. So, colors are important, right? I'm not sure that I'm really leading us down a good place here, but it is interesting nonetheless. So,
Agreed. Agreed.
on the AI side of things, I know that it has changed a lot in the way our team is working. It's
Hmm.
changed a lot in the way the companies we work with are working, and I'm guessing it seems like it is just at such a rapid pace that the way you were doing things 3 months ago, you're like, oh yeah, that's the way we did it 3 months ago. Now we've got a whole different skill set that's there. Is that what you're experiencing, or am I just like really in the FOMO over here?
No, I think it's wildly different every 30 days. I mean, we all had our week with Fable moment, but in general, I think it's wild to see it. We happen to be working with a lot of customers working at the forefront, and so we're also seeing them shift and pivot. But I think most people are generally using Claude these days, at least as part of their workflow. But outside of that reality, everything is constantly changing. I mean, again, you go back a year ago and I would occasionally play with the tool, try and help me do research. I was working with a lot of Gemini back then, or I made a cool background image and I was like so proud of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have a fleet of co-work agents that run competitive analysis for me every single week, or do different research on where LLMs are going or SLMs are going and different models are changing. Similarly, I think now we're able to just move a lot faster than we were
Yeah.
before. And what before I joined this role, the thing I was building on the side was essentially a tool to help me as a product person to be able to understand our customers and dig into conversations. And now the MCPs that we're using of our recording tools are so good that I don't even need that anymore. And it's
Oh,
just
really?
really cool to
It's
see how
already
quickly
obsolete.
already obsolete. Absolutely.
But the things you learned in building that, you're still using those principles, right?
That's exactly right. Mostly it was a fun tool for me to figure out, okay, how do I build a thing
Mm.
with at the time cursor and what are bad decisions I can make? Trying to get some of those out of the way early, though. I like to keep making bad decisions so I can keep learning, of course.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, right? So you mentioned that you're getting this feedback from customers on
Mm-hmm.
buttons that don't work or the flow doesn't quite make sense. Talk to me a little bit about what is the level of fidelity of what you're showing to customers to get this feedback. Is it kind of a mix of wireframes to begin with, or you kind of AI lets you blast past the wireframe phase, or are they looking at live stuff or staging? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it also depends on your skill set. So we don't have a designer in house. So the role is shared between me, Claude, the engineering team, the executive team. It varies. And so I think that changes a little bit of the conversation is based on the skill set you have. So for me, it would take me just as long to wireframe as it would to pair with, we're using Claude Design, but like Magic Patterns I know is a classic, and have a clickable prototype with flaws. That's the way I'd say it. And so
Yeah.
I think most of the conversations I have with customers, and I had one of these today, is it's a clickable prototype that I was working on today with flaws.
Mhm.
There's like a pill icon that looks like a button. Why would you do that, Claude? I don't know, but it loves to do those kinds of things. And so there's a lot of it's great to be able to iterate quickly, but then I think I spend a lot more time after the conversation going, okay, so like this is what the prototype looks like. This is what the customer is telling me. This is what I think they're actually trying to accomplish. And
Mhm.
this is why this prototype is actually kind of bad. And I need to start over. I can do that relatively quickly and I can go through a lot of iterations. And again, as I mentioned, I'm spending so much time with customers that the next day I can show a completely different prototype and a completely different concept to somebody else and continue to get that feedback. And it's been great, especially again with our early customers to be able to every week or every couple of weeks, here's the thing we're working on. Here's the design I'm playing with. And then one of those weeks, either one of the engineers gets to implement that thing, which is a whole other like little fun being early fact.
Yeah, yeah. So a question I have is because you just mentioned there that you can get Cloud Design to create something that you know a clickable prototype with flaws, but on the design standpoint, it probably looks pretty high fidelity and looks like it's kind of ready to go. So, do you think that having a higher fidelity mock-ups can maybe get in the way of the customer understanding that this is still malleable and not quite there, or do you think it doesn't matter?
I don't think it necessarily I mean, it depends on how you introduce it and the
Hmm.
relationship you have with that customer. So that's certainly,
Okay.
if you show it as your product, they'll think it's your product. So like
Hmm.
that certainly is one side of it. And I'm really intentional that like, this is not our product. This is something I'm thinking about
Hmm.
and make sure I'm talking to the person who's prepared and able to understand that and see it. So I think that that's important as a first principle starting point. I do think it's really easy for a customer or anyone to say, yeah, that looks good. And then it's on me as the product person to be like, okay, what are you actually trying to accomplish? And to some extent, learn why it's actually not very good. Because there's going to be a bunch of things that are wrong with any design. You can always keep iterating. And so just understanding like, okay, so like, what would you do next? What would you try and do? One of the things I love to ask is also like, what are delightful experiences for that customer or
Mm.
for that person? What do you love? Like, I bet you have a top two or three things that pop into your mind when you think of truly delightful UX experiences and whether, especially in security, right? Like security products are not notoriously delightful. So when I can find those moments or products people love, like all better.
Sure, sure. So are you typically asking customers for other applications that kind of do this thing you're trying to do well?
Not necessarily do the thing I'm trying to do well, but definitely like moments of delight that they think of that are at least
Okay, okay.
related. Especially, I mean, a lot of the time it varies. Like if we're doing something that no one else is doing, or we're doing something that other people are doing in different ways with different types
Mm,
of data, especially like inventory or something. But I think I'm more looking for what are the types of workflows that they like than
mm,
necessarily
yeah,
what other products have you used similarly.
sure, sure. And maybe I asked a poor question. It's more like, hey, if you have if your application you're creating needs to allow them to enter in some information to access access a service or something, right?
Hmm.
Then what we'll do sometimes is we'll say, hey, is there an application that you use that makes it really easy? Can you think of an application that makes it really easy for you to connect this thing to this thing, right? And then that gives us something that sometimes that's a product we're familiar with. Sometimes it might have nothing to do with security. It could be from some, I don't know, rideshare app or something.
Right.
And you're like, oh, I didn't even know it had that option. That's a really cool pattern that we can learn from. So I'm just kind of curious. Do you ever ask questions like that?
Try to. I think my goal is the same as what you're describing there. And I know this is your area of expertise, so you probably ask really insightful, thoughtful questions, and you poke a little bit better than I do. And so like that's, uh, you get those, you learn about those magic moments, then you get to build those magic moments, and that's
That's
what
right.
it's all about.
That's right. And finding out what makes it magic is what you were
Hmm.
referring to before, and that is really important, right? Not just, hey,
Absolutely.
Acme Corp has the best whatever, right? It's more like, okay, what's great about it?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or
Why do you love it?
yeah, yeah, or what even. Again, going back to my dad's quote about what not to do, what's an example of something that really doesn't do this well? And they typically will say, oh, yeah, like Microsoft Teams is just the worst at whatever. I like to pick on Microsoft, but yeah,
They have amazing products that I love, and then they also have SharePoint, which I don't quite love, but we all wish we were Microsoft sometimes. That's okay.
sure, yeah. I mean, I think maybe I just don't get it, right? Like I'm typically the person that thinks if it's hard for me to use a product, I typically think, okay, well, they just didn't do a good job of building it. I don't blame myself, right? But with SharePoint, sometimes like maybe I just don't understand how this thing is supposed to work, right? Maybe it is me.
I don't know if I feel that way about SharePoint. Sometimes I feel that way about Windows. I'm
Okay,
both a Mac and Windows user, so I think that's more
okay,
fair. Though I do think like this is at least partially a design podcast, and I think it's important to say like what is the thing for me that I think about is most powerful thing about design is it's that you remove the mental effort for
mm,
a person. Like what they're trying to do before they know what they're trying to do. So the action or the flow, it just works. Like you're going in, you're looking for something, the button there is the thing you're looking for. Like you're done before you start, essentially.
yeah,
And you removed 5 minutes, 10 minutes, both from their workflow, but then also like you've made them a little bit happier. And like that's the trick about building great products sometimes is they've saved time, but also they believe in you because you made their lives easier.
yeah. And sometimes they don't even notice that you made it. If you're really doing your
Right.
job well, they don't even notice that you did these things to make
Hmm.
make your life so much easier, right? So one of the interactions that comes to mind is the on Twitter the pull to refresh, because you're like scrolling, and then when you scroll and there's nothing else that's there because we didn't have live loading, it'd have to make another request to pull another X number of tweets,
Sure.
and so you're naturally scrolling and you just accidentally. I remember the first time I did that, I pulled down and I got the little spinny wheel, and then boom, 20 more tweets popped up, and I was like, wow, like I didn't even realize I didn't. I
Yeah.
basically hit the refresh button without realizing I had to hit the refresh button.
Yeah, the magic of anything but a refresh button is real. So
Yeah,
that's a fun one. I forgot about that. They did a really good job.
yeah, that was great. The only reason I remember it is I was at South by Southwest and went to a panel where the guy that invented that was on there, and somebody mentioned it. It was just kind of cool to say,
Right.
oh, that actually was 15 feet away from the person who came up with that, and that's a really genius little interaction that you see all over the place now. So
Yeah, agreed. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah, very cool. So I know that right now you are. Well, maybe tell me about like what is the biggest challenge that you have right now that you're facing.
Yeah, I mean we're a pre-seed startup, which means it's all about product market fit,
Mm,
making sure I think especially AI security, right? It's an early field. We're partnering with customers who understand what the problem is and can look like, but also we're learning about what does the data model for AI look like? What does
mm,
it mean to look at inventory? What threats are real now versus what might come later? How do we protect an organization? So I think, you go any company before Series A, I'd say give or take. At Series A, maybe you feel pretty good about the direction and product market fit, but you're in that you got to prove it. You got to prove it for
sure.
yourselves. You got to prove it for your customers. You got to prove it for your investors if you're not bootstrapped. So I think the biggest thing on my mind is understanding what our customers are looking for, what's the real problem they're solving for, how do we make that really easy and obvious for them? I think that's number one, two, and three, and probably for a while. So.
Gotcha. Very cool. So I know you said that you're wearing a lot of different hats, and one of the hats that you're excited about is that you are able to create designs and then put those into clickable prototypes and then take it all the way through to where you're actually developing some code and pushing it in. And so that's a lot of agency that has agency that has been given to you. So how do you know when you might be kind of overstepping your role as not an actual developer, right? Or an actual designer, or anyway,
Yeah.
how do you know where that line is?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I will say this also applies to customer success. I had to talk to a friend of mine who was customer success in an early stage company to try and make sure that I understand the problem our customers are solving for. But that's another story. I think the main thing that I've run into is, I think it's one thing to know when to stop on a design and make sure I'm using my time right, or, solving for the company's needs or customers' needs. It's a whole other when I get into trying to code a thing, because it's easier relative for me to come up with something that I think is interesting or would be a more valuable experience for our customers. It's a whole other understand essentially the data model of our product, what's accessible on the front end, and how do I continue to iterate in a safe way. And so my first week I was shipping PRs, relatively tiny little ones. My second week I was like, oh, I shipped some cool PRs. Maybe I can rebuild the dashboard. And so I did design an updated dashboard, and I think it was better. But what I learned relatively quickly is there are some things that are available in the front end, some things that aren't available in the front end, and then also some things that just don't exist. And while it would be cool to like have an LLM do a bunch of things in the background, not everything is a great idea to just ship and deploy and to play with. And it's just not as quite as easy to Claude code it. And so that basically led to me playing with Claude for a little bit, which is fine. Then me putting out a couple of PRs, which distracted the engineering team for a little bit, and us having a good conversation about, okay, Michael, this is fine. This is maybe don't do this. And, it's thrilling to be able to end things now. But it's also really helpful and important for me to understand where to stop. And, thankfully, no customers were harmed in the process of this learning.
Nice.
But it was still a lot of fun to know, like, back end API changes, maybe not. Just let the experts handle that. Thankfully, Claude's not there yet.
Yes, I'm reminded of what Uncle Ben told Peter. With great power comes great responsibility, right?
Couldn't have said it better. Really couldn't have said it better.
I mean, yeah, it did. Marvel has done a pretty good job of getting those quotes in there. So one of the things I did also want to talk about is you mentioned that you don't have a designer on your team, and so I'm kind of curious, what's that like? I mean, do you feel like that is to the detriment of the product you're creating, or do you feel like you're kind of creating, for lack of a better word, like design debt that at some point is going to have to be paid off? Or is it kind of like you're in this process now where you're like, okay, whatever we create, we know that at some point we're going to need to rethink the UI and UX of this, but we're still trying to figure out the product market fit, so it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies. I mean, some of the most fun moments in my career have been partnering with amazing designers and getting to see them fly and building something really unique and beautiful
Mm,
that makes our customers happy.
mm,
So that has just always been really fun for me. And I've had a lot of great design partners, thankfully. We're really early.
mm,
And a lot of our use case is about identification of security threats and then making
mm,
it relatively easy for anyone to investigate and resolve. And so I think that some of this is about cybersecurity and some of that is about our stage. But to your core question, do I think I am creating design debt? I'm trying to avoid it, but we have some. I know we do. Every company has some. You
oh
try and
yeah.
not make it too bad. And I think in the same way, we also have some front end debt that I'm trying not to make worse as I go. I think it comes down to knowing your limits. In the same way, I got to know my limits on API. Like one of the things I spend a good amount of time with is Claude's design system function. And if anyone here, if you've used it or anyone uses it, it's not a design system. It's really not. I don't know exactly why they call it a design system. It's got pieces of design system, but it's not. And so that becomes just a challenge of like, okay, so, it's looking at font like this and our product actually has font like this. And I'm not going to change the font of our entire product right now. That's a little bit outside of my scope. So it's just understanding the limitations and then trying to balance it all out. But I think my role has changed, as has everyone's roles in product and engineering. And so,
Absolutely.
I look forward to partnering with the designers in the future, and then being able to make the product a little bit better, a little bit faster.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's really cool also that because of the AI tools, again, it puts those design tools within reach, right?
Mhm.
So maybe it's not going to be able to design the best experience, but it does allow a good solid design experience to be had, right?
I think that's right, and I think it's not just evolved like when I think of myself as the product person, it's also evolved the definition of a PRD, the definition of a
Mhm.
one pager, because historically that long form written document was incredibly important. It was the only thing that would exist for a pretty long period of time because it would be hard to create a live clickable prototype. That would take a lot of time and effort, and you would never start that. You would start with a wireframe, and you would start with customer quotes and all these things. And I still start with customer quotes. I still start with the problem, but
Mhm.
I might almost instantaneously also have Claude build me a clickable prototype that I can talk to someone about to better understand the problem, to make sure that like what I'm thinking about is directionally the kinds of things that they need. And I'm able to do that essentially simultaneously because one is about me listening to a call with a customer or doing some research, and the other is basically saying, all right, here's what I know, Claude. Here's the customer's conversation. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Go give me something I can talk to someone about. And I think that that's really different. And to your point, the PRD doesn't need to be perfect. Need the design in order for me to then be like, okay, now I get to partner with the broader engineering team and start to say like, hey, here's one end, here's the other end. How do we go build something cool?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. It definitely is exciting, getting to figure out patterns that didn't exist before, like on how we interact with AI in a
Mm-hmm.
UI. I mean, the chat pattern is there, obviously, but there's problems with that. That's not always the best option at all. And so, as we are not only using AI to build these tools, we're also building tools to allow people to interact with AI
Mm-hmm.
in our products, right? So it's been exciting to see those patterns be figured out, right? So that's a challenging and cool and scary and exciting and all the feels, right? But it's great that we get to be a part of that. I like that better than it just being kind of boring and mundane. So
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather be on the forefront and be making the change than having to wait or not like, trying to hide from it. I love playing with the tools. I love seeing
yeah.
what's new, what's evolving in technology. When I was in college, I like to study Luddite theory a little bit. So you
Mm-hmm.
understand that there are consequences of technologies,
Mm-hmm.
like the consequences of fish sticks, which there's a book about this if anybody's curious. But, the same way there's good and bad to AI. But I like to think at the end of this, there'll be new opportunities, new roles for people and for humans, and it's about understanding how you use the tools. Just like a hammer. Yeah, but it's my job is really different today than it was 6 months ago.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. And 6 months from now, it'll be different than the way we're doing it today, right? So
Hmm.
that's really cool. But I am going to make you go back and explain the consequences of fish sticks because I can't just I haven't heard that before, and I'm not going to be able to leave that alone.
Fair. I wish I remembered the story just like a little bit better, but essentially, I think this is like 70 years ago, give or take now. Essentially, they came up with like flat flash freezing, right? And so like that enabled people to have like all this fish that would historically go bad relatively quickly and you couldn't transit and all those things and turn it into, okay, you can flash freeze these and we can put them in a freezer section and now everyone can buy microwave fish sticks. And I'm butchering this story because I hadn't, I mean, this is 15 years ago that I was reading this book, but
Sure.
essentially it's that concept of you introduce something and it changes everything. Like the story I remember marginally better is actually like the, the car, right? You go from everybody is transiting on trains to, oh, we can have like a car and we're gonna,
Mm-hmm.
be two by two or whatever it might be. And that leads into the highway system and in parts of the country, the destruction of trains, and all these different things. And so it's always interesting to understand what happens when you have a new technology or you have a
Yeah.
new invention and what are the consequences of that invention.
Yeah, there's going to be pros and cons to everything. So yeah, well, hopefully we have more pros than cons that come out of this game changing evolution that is AI just working its way into all parts of our lives. And so it's definitely going to be an exciting wave to ride. So hopefully we're
Mhm.
still on the surfboard. My analogy is really getting bad here. Sorry about that.
I know when I couldn't remember the fish stick story, it was like, oh no, you don't remember the fish stick story. It's like that's the whole thing here. So I was like, that was okay, but yeah, no,
No, I thought you got it. I thought you got it. Yeah.
I wish I remembered it better. That was my real thing. But you remember what you remember these days.
Yeah, yeah, I thought that was good. I will remember fish sticks when I think about consequences now. So I think that
That I'm cool with.
you nailed it.
That is my goal. So I'm cool with that. So maybe it's okay that I mildly butchered. No one else has been
All right,
necessary
yeah,
now.
I think we're done then, right? We've got the fish sticks in there. I think we've covered all the topics we need to, right?
Yeah, I assume this podcast is about fish sticks, right? Like I didn't
It
mess
is
up,
now.
right? Yeah.
It is now. We should start a whole nother podcast just on fish sticks and the intricacies thereof.
I mean, if you want to start a podcast on letter theory, I could. I would be down for that. I'd have to reread the book and some of my
Right,
notes from
right.
college, but otherwise, I'm in.
Okay, great. Man, Michael, this has been great talking with you and getting some insights on your approach to integration of AI and
Mhm.
also just in how it is exciting to hear from someone in a small team that is having to wear
Mhm.
lots of hats and kind of figuring out how long should I wear this one and when is it time that I should switch to another one, right? So this has been great talking with you and getting some insights from you. So I appreciate you sharing that, and then also just I appreciate your friendship as well. So
Brilliant.
thanks for spending some time with me today and talking about fish sticks. I mean product design.
Yeah, no, William, it is absolutely always a pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to chat. It's always great to reminisce about fish sticks. I mean product design. So
Right.
yeah, always a pleasure.
Okay, cool. Thanks, man.